So, Mark, once upon a time, we used to have like this TV block or a set of TV channels, and they were kind of geared towards educational purposes. And they found ways of doing this in actually entertaining ways. And these would be things like TLC, the Learning Channel, or A&E, Arts and Entertainment. And, of course, the juggernaut that kind of headed them all, and I think was the owner of them, was the Discovery Channel. This is now a bygone era, as A&E, I actually can't even tell you what's on A&E anymore. I think it's just shows about terrible restaurants out on the West Coast and their just dramatic staff. And I think TLC is all about, I think weight loss. I think it's weight loss now. I think that's the big one going on, is just large people needing to lose a lot of weight.
It used to be about like little people in big worlds.
Yes.
And now it's about big people, same world.
Yes.
Which I don't want to cast judgment because
No.
Yeah. There was a time when I was in that glass house as a large person. It took some time.
Yeah. And again, not to disparage the people who are on these shows and are the subject of them. It's just that these networks seem to have found, honestly, this weird, like they're like straddling a line between like expletive or exploitive, not expletive. Like I feel like they're exploiting the people who are in these scenarios for our entertainment, because we've just become awful with what we consider entertainment these days. And seeing people in these, rough living situations and watching TV for hours on end of it for content now. And Discovery kind of has done this too in a way, except they kind of focus on, I don't know, like fish tank making and people living in the wilderness and being totally shocked and offended that when they've been living on government land their whole life illegally, and then the government finds out and asks them to leave, they're just beyond themselves that this would happen. So they just kind of find these niches and they just stay in there. And they've kind of lost that whole, learning part of the Learning Channel or the arts part of the Arts and Entertainment Channel. And the Discovery part has also been kind of lost. Like the discovering of what we're capable of as a species or finding out new things, it's all sort of gone. But instead of just giving you about an hour to an hour and a half of us complaining about the time when TV used to be good, we will focus on some of that good and how it gave us something to look forward to each week when it came on. And while there was a plethora of things on Discovery Network that did this, things like BattleBots, which were incredibly fun to watch,
yes.
Or Junkyard Wars was awesome. Did you ever watch Junkyard Wars?
Yeah, dude, I watched the hell out of that.
Yeah, 2 teams in a junkyard and said, you got to build this, and they just, Tony Stark it in a cave and just, take scraps and make stuff out of it, and it was awesome. It was really cool, really good stuff. And one thing that made all of this kind of feel more accessible and more fun to the modern audience was a show called Mythbusters. And this was an absolutely massive juggernaut that ran from 2003 all the way to 2016. 17 seasons, 296 episodes, and taught us way more things that are capable of duct tape than we imagined.
It was a lot. It was a lot to take in. I mean, back at this point in time, too, like back in 2003, just to help people visualize what I was up to at that point, I was actually slinging pizzas back then and would find unique ways to smuggle out chicken wings from my employer. And there were times when I'd be sitting there on my couch just covered in ranch and buffalo sauce, and I'd turn on Discovery Channel, and what would be there but a man with a beret and a walrus mustache and a very nerdy man who had a lot of enthusiasm.
Yes, and really enjoyed the fedora himself.
Yes, he took the fedora. Of course, we're referring to Jamie Hyneman and Adam Savage, who were the hosts of this show. And to your point about BattleBots, these guys actually had some experience on BattleBots. They actually were contestants on that. And And so I didn't want to say that I completely recognized everything about these guys when I first saw Mythbusters, but I did recognize Hyneman because, like I mentioned, this guy is pretty distinct.
Yes.
You're not going to confuse him for someone else.
No.
And yeah. And he actually, I remember Hyneman for BattleBots specifically because he made a BattleBot so dangerous they wouldn't let him compete with it.
That sounds about right for him.
Definitely on brand, yeah. So yeah, it was really cool to see these guys kind of take up that mantle because this was, like we mentioned, this is 2003 when they first start doing this, and this is long before the nerd tidal wave that we've talked about on our blog. We've talked about it in a previous episode back in season 1 with the Nerdtastic voyage, and it was such a springboard for a lot of us back then. You know, like we were all kind of looking for something to bury that nerddom, or like what could help me capture more of my nerddom. And this was it for me. This was the show that kind of helped me become more inquisitive, to your point about Discovery Channel and what it used to do. But I mean, what kind of effect did it have for you?
Well, one, it was refreshing because it was just a great concept and a great idea, and it was that alone just captured you each time because it was brilliant. It literally would say the premise of the show is what's something that we may have always heard of, like as something like our parents always told us growing up, or we was told this was always a thing that happened this way, or something you saw in a movie, or something you saw on the internet, and like, is that true or is that bullshit? Let's figure it out and let's try it ourselves. And just having that like kind of like can-do attitude of like, yeah, let's actually try it. Let's see what happens. And that's what hooked me into it, is because like it never was boring to me. It never got old to me because there was just always so many things out there for them to test and then for them to do. So for me, as someone who always liked questioning what I saw or trying to like make something happen that probably could or couldn't happen, and just seeing like what would actually happen if I tried it. It was just fun seeing other people do that with actual resources. Because that's something, of course, like we didn't have a lot of growing up, but they certainly did, as one of them owned a special effects studio and had quite a bit of things at their disposal. And then on top of that, they also get a budget from the Discovery Channel. So that's the effect that it had on me, was just that kind of that, it was a good mix of like scientific like process with like can-do attitude. So it was fun to see something like that represented and seen on TV.
Yeah, Joe, to your point, this show definitely had this burgeoning positivity to it. It even though they had some really strange things that would come through in like the fan mail and some of these urban legends were like, how do you recreate these things? It never really felt like they were going, we don't know how to do this and it scares us. It was always about, we're going to build this. We'll figure it out, and the details don't matter. We're going to get there.
Yep. And I think, I mean, obviously what made part of that possible are just the hosts themselves, and that they had a good amount of experience and background to actually, one, pull these things off. Because, like you said, like, sometimes you might think like, okay, so we heard about it, but how would you actually do it? How would you pull it off? But these guys and gal had enough know-how of stuff that they had done to where it would be, I don't want to say easy for them, but like as far as drafting and thinking of how to do it, it was almost like second nature to them. Like, yeah, I have no idea if this is going to work, but this is how I think we could try it. And they would just go for it. And so like we said before, that Adam and Jamie had experience being on BattleBots together. But other than that, again, they had a good amount of like Hollywood experience to them, where Adam Savage had worked on some of our favorites, like The Mummy and Galaxy Quest. He also got to work on, I think, ship design for Attack of the Clones, and also did some work on The Matrix Reloaded. And Jamie Hyneman himself, like I said, he's the owner of M5 Industries, so he just owned a special effects company that they got to use that as the actual backdrop from the show. Also a ship captain and a dive master.
Yeah. It's kind of funny how that his resume, it takes these twists and turns. Like we've talked about how Hyneman, once again, incredible mustache.
Yes.
But the fact that he is a dive master and a boat captain and then a special effects wizard, it's hilarious how these guys seem to intersect throughout their careers, because if you just read Hyneman's resume, you'd go, there's no way those guys would ever meet randomly. No. but they did. You mentioned BattleBots. Obviously, they did some of the Star Wars prequel movies together, and The Matrix, of course, too. And so, yeah, it was really cool to see where they came from. And then years later, I would discover that, like, holy shit, they worked on some of my favorite movies. Like, this is funny to put a face to a name, because this is one of those things about movies that I frankly do not ever really get into, is actually looking at the people that are building sets and building props and animatronics and doing that kind of stuff. I mean, we talked about composers, we've talked about screenwriters and all that kind of stuff, but we never talk about these folks. And so, this was a unique opportunity, not just in an idea for a show, but to see these folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing them get to, like, basically thrive in their environment. And so, we take, like, these two themselves, because while they're on the Discovery Network, and this is at a time when they really, really pride themselves on, like, science-based content. And these two themselves, when we just gave you, like, a good chunk of the resume, science isn't really there, like, in the forefront. Like, you wouldn't you wouldn't have to necessarily be an engineer to do what they do. While you probably could, and it's probably the people in the movie industry would be very thankful if you had an engineering degree designing things for them. They would probably really enjoy that. But it's two people, like, observing the scientific method, and, like, approaching things with basically almost like a mind like a scientist to try and see if they would work or not, was really cool. And when the show would get big enough after a few seasons, they found out that there were just way too many things to test on their own, and they had to get some help and call in 3 more hosts.
Yeah, which actually, this is where Adam Savage called in some of the folks that he had worked with previously as well. And that's where Tori Belleci, Carrie Byron, and Grant Imahara ended up coming into the show. They're all former coworkers, and obviously people that work really well together. It's not just something that you see in the results. You see it on screen. There's, chemistry, charisma, all that good stuff. And so it was really nice to take it from two people that frankly weren't bad. Like Adam and Jamie were great hosts, because Adam is like the flair, I guess, from a nerd standpoint, and Jamie is like barely human, so it balanced well.
Yeah.
But then when they bring in Tori, Carrie and Grant, it was like, wow, yeah, okay, now you've got even more palatable people on this show. And I always enjoyed watching that, how they split that up, because those three actually work separately for the most part from, like, M5 and where Adam and Jamie were. So they didn't always have intersecting priorities. Like, they would help work on some of the same projects, but it didn't mean they were right next to each other.
No. And that's what was kind of fun, because it's almost like you got, like, it's usually like, typically 2 to 3 myths an episode, depending on, like, the length of the myth. Sometimes even more, because you'd have Jamie and why am I forgetting his name? It's Adam.
Oh, and Adam.
So they're trying to yeah. So, but anyway, it'd be like having, like, almost an episode, like, split, where you get to focus on one really big myth with Jamie and Adam, and that would take, like, half of your episode. And other times you could have 1, 2, or sometimes even 3 smaller myths being taken care of by Tori, Grant, and Carrie. So it was just really fun having that as a dynamic on the show, and was a way to, again, get as much content in as you could to each episode.
Yeah, the way they actually did the storytelling throughout an episode, as you mentioned, with the multiple different myths that they would test, it almost felt almost like Guy Ritchie in presentation, because, or actually / Christopher Nolan. We'll go kind of broad here, because they'll present part of a myth, then they'll bounce back to a different one, and so you kind of get to, you don't get a full uninterrupted 15 minutes just dedicated to one thing.
Yeah.
Like, you actually have to balance multiple different myths at one time. And I thought that was actually kind of cool to break that up, because I'm not going to say science is boring. Like, I enjoy science, but think about it, Joe. Like, if you watched just one myth for 30 minutes, would you make it through the entire thing?
Killer. No, it's not enough. You've got to pizzazz it up a little bit here with more myths.
Yeah. Yeah. By the second 10-minute block, the heat is on to you. You know, you get to play shadow games.
Yeah.
So,
But I do
God,
like
yes.
that you are like, we are doing like legit, like saying like spent like watching one science experiment, one myth for 30 minutes, because one thing that this show has brought to into my life, other than just like the myths themselves, because as a teacher, I've used several Mythbusters experiments where we would just test them at school for a few days, where it's like, you know what, content's getting a little dry, let's spice it up with just some experimentation, and we watch how like they would do something, and they'd start with like the actual myth, the concept, they look at the physics behind it, they try it on a smaller scale before they build it up, and they execute it, they try it X amount of times, and they see if it's doable or plausible. And it's just good scientific process and method. So even when you have two people who do not have like science backgrounds, like they're not engineers, they're not physicists, they're just two guys who like experimenting with with movie sets and props. So it was a good way to work that in with my classroom. So I always appreciated that. And then, of course, there would always be like the one killer moment at the end of the experiment where I use a quote from Adam Savage to this day, and that that science without paperwork is just screwing around. So you have to basically write a paper about this and what we tested and what it proved. And that was, you know, just part of the love of it all, is that you got two relatable guys and, you know, eventually three more relatable people as well. And they just made the process fun for you. And part of that was how they laid out the episodes. And I think they basically always do it where they would get to a point in them building something or making something, and it'd be like a crucial part or a large part where they'd indicate a lot of work would have to happen. But instead of just skipping over all of that, they would cut to the second myth and then be working on the second myth, show something, do a quick update on where they were in the other ones. And it was a fun way of making you feel like you were actually there with them working on everything. So it just kind of pulled you into it, making you a part of it. And that was also just part of like the really big fun of the show.
It did. That's a really good point that you mentioned, because I was thinking the same thing. Like they would give you time to make it seem like, okay, we're going to figure this out, but we have to think it through. And so while we do that, we're going to send you over here. And so it almost felt like a real process that you got to start and finish with, and kind of follow through some of the complications that would happen at times. But one thing I wanted to mention, though, before we get too far away, when you mentioned that you were quoting Adam Savage, I thought you were going to say the thing that he mentions in the opening of the show for like the first 3 or 4 seasons, where he says, "I reject your reality and substitute my own." That is, to this day, one of my favorite quotes I've ever. I use it so much because it is so damn funny. And yeah, God, I love that. But that's a really good point, man. Like the beginning of this show did feel like that, and yeah, it actually felt like an organic thing that reality TV screws up all the time.
Yeah,
right. Like you get these organic TV shows so rarely, and it's like they insert things. And now I'm not saying they didn't do this in this show, because all reality is kind of a a formula, but this wasn't really built like a lot of other reality shows, because it came from an Australian-based writer named Peter Rees, who I have no idea who that is.
I got nothing.
I'm just going to say, I'm sure none of us know that. And when they actually got the concept for this show, it started off as one of those things like, are we going to present myths and then just ask people for their opinions of them? Or should we ask about myths and then try to disprove them? Right. And so oddly enough, Jamie Hyneman was at the top of like the casting call. Like he was the first guy they were thinking of. And I go, zero charisma, weird looking dude, has a hard time balancing relationships. Yeah. Let's get him out there.
Seems like he seems like great for in front of the camera style work.
Well, that's the only reason why we got Adam Savage, was because Jamie Hyneman said, I don't think people are going to find me interesting. We need to get somebody else involved.
Which is also just funny that he said that himself. It wasn't like someone came to him and told him, like, hey, dude, like a wet mop over here. I don't think we can pull this off with you. Let's bring in someone fun to jazz this up. He's like, no, I'm not good for in front of the camera. That's why I work behind it usually. We need someone entertaining. And like, I like again, like we talked about how like the dynamic between the two like main hosts of this and how they just balance and work with each other so well. And it's almost like you think of like almost like Kirk and Spock style, except if Kirk focused more on just joking with Spock as opposed to being a leader, and Spock was just there to deal with the joking. It's kind of that relationship is the best way to put it. He is the Geordi and Data and the Spock and Kirk sort of thing we've got going on, of the almost non-human Jamie Hyneman with the fun-loving Adam Savage.
Which always felt so weird to me, because in the years after the show ended, they interviewed Hyneman, asking him about Savage and saying, hey, do you guys still keep up? And he says, no, I haven't talked to him since the show ended. And they go, oh, well, that's kind of weird. You guys worked together for like 16 years. Why not? And then he just truthfully said to them, yeah, I respect him a lot, but we're not friends.
Yeah.
And I'm like, when I saw that, I'm like, how the hell do you work with someone for like the better part of 20 years, on TV and off, and there's no friendship there? Like, what's going on?
Jamie's just a bit of a robot.
he seriously, I swear to God, if you ever like peeled back the skin on that dude, it's like all metal, and it's like a T-100 under there, man.
I mean, he's one of the closest things we have to Egon Spengler.
Yes, he is.
I am positive at one point in time in that show, there was a myth about drilling a hole through your own head, and Jamie was convinced it would have worked until Adam stopped him. So,
seriously, like that's what is so funny about that. It doesn't seem like it should work, because as nerds, I think you and I can speak for each other quite well here. Not all nerds are meant to get along with each other. And the fact that you had two people that did for so long, but weren't friends, I still do not understand that at all.
And also, again, like you said, like they had something that a lot of reality TV just didn't and still doesn't. And part of that is the fact that they have almost a production quality, like on-screen chemistry with each other. As they balance each other, so their personalities and their attitudes balance each other so well. And they had enough respect for each other, obviously without actually being friends, that they just worked in front of the camera. And it wasn't just a bunch of like door slamming drama that would go on. And that was like the pull to the show. Like, oh, would you believe that these two opposites, this odd couple, like working together, can they actually get it done? That was never a part of it. That it was never their personalities in question that would make it so that they couldn't do their job or see if it would work. They would just like cut each other really quick on something and then go right back to working and be fine with it. And it was something that was just completely missing from anything else. Even like at this time on the same network, I think you had like Orange County Choppers. It was just, okay, how much can this family tear each other apart this week while they build a motorcycle? And that was part of the bigger draw of the show, was that people loved seeing this dad scream at his kid for an hour. And then they managed to pull out a mediocre working, cool looking bike. Which, I could say that because they all kind of look the same after a point. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah. No, that's a good vein though, because at this point in time, you're totally right. Like reality TV was going through some changes. We had gotten through, some of the early Fox stuff, like the Magician's Secrets. And if you want to consider fact or fiction beyond belief, like in there, I kind of do. I think it's there. But then, you get into the early 2000s, and then you start getting these shows like you mentioned, and we've talked about Little People, Big World. You start having like MTV and VH1, they're doing some stuff. And this is unique even for reality TV, let alone an educational show, because you and I both probably grew up on stuff like Beekman's World and Bill Nye the Science Guy, right? Like they're critically different types of TV. And so this managed to build my interest in science, keeping it positive. I mean, they got frustrated. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah,
they did. They did. But it wasn't because failure was something they focused on. It was more about that famous Edison line of, I didn't, fail at inventing the light bulb or whatever. I just learned how to not make it thousands of times. Right.
Yep.
That's more what Jamie and Adam kind of took in with them as they did this stuff. But
yeah. And one thing that they were really good with on the show was actually pointing out safety measures that they took on it. So, like, obviously, like, right away, they would have basically at the start of the show and like, when you'd return from a commercial break, you'd get a disclaimer of basically the standard, like, don't try this at home, we're professionals. And then they'd, like, make fun of you if you actually wanted to try it at home.
Give us a break. Don't try what you're about to see at home.
Basically call you an idiot for doing some of the ridiculous things that they tried when they had an entire studio behind them to make it possible. So that was part of it. And then they also won just when they were doing the experiments, because the nature of a lot of their experiments were actually pretty dangerous. So, like, you talk about, like, them, I had mentioned that, like, they showed us, like, more ways to do things with duct tape than they ever thought imaginable. And, like, they made an entire bridge made out of duct tape, but as they crossed it, they had a crane with, you know, safety gear harnesses, so that if the bridge failed or they fell through, they would be safe. Or the number of different, myths that they did with firearms, and they would be absolutely sure that they would have protective, like, one, eyewear, earwear, and just, you know, safety barriers around the gun going off and everything else that was needed. Because, I mean, there's one myth where they tested, like, what would happen if two bullets actually hit each other. So, of course, you know, if you try this at home, it'd be two idiots, like, actually pointing guns at each other, like, all right, let's see if this here myth would work. And then they would shoot, and then you have two dead morons. So, of course, them actually, like, rigging this with machines, robotics, and still having safety stuff around them was like, this is a way to actually see if these sort of things would work, if that would happen. And of course, like, it wasn't just firearm stuff. It'd be anything that involved explosives, because, again, they were blowing shit up, like, every other week. So that was also part of it, like making sure that people were a safe distance away. They had barriers between the explosion and them. They have, like, fire resistant, like, wear on. All the stuff that they did to make sure that the audience would know, hey, do not try this at home.
Do you want to make a very important distinction, though? The United States always got the disclaimers. Other countries didn't necessarily need it. And I think that was deliberate.
I like that you put needed. So it wasn't like there was an error of, like, oh, we just forgot to put that clip in when we showed this throughout Europe. It's like, no. The Europeans just know better. They're not going to try this. The Americans will be curious. They will try these things at home.
It's like that joke with the invention of the bulletproof vest. And it's like, all right, Tom, I'm ready. Shoot me. And then he shoots the guy in the leg and he goes, no, the vest, Tom. Shoot the vest. That definitely like, feels like what they're doing.
Specific, yeah. So you really you can't blame Tom.
Yeah, no, you can't.
This is right there with, like, the bulletproof cup from Super Troopers.
Oh my, yes, exactly.
You know, there's someone somewhere in some state that tried it. Like, we made it. Of course. We have. They're like, oh no, it was fine. We put body armor on everywhere else too, but we also had the cup and we tested it. It's like, you shouldn't have. You really shouldn't have.
But that was a good point. They were so dedicated to the safety of stuff, and it wasn't just in the set dressing either. It was actually to the point where they would blur out a bunch of stuff. They would blur out anything that had to do with explosives. They typically wouldn't give you a whole lot of data on that. They would use code words for some of that stuff to keep it as safe as possible. And one thing was really funny too is when they were testing the myth about peeing on the electric rail for the, you know, for like a rail system, train rail, they even blurred out the peeing apparatus they created for the dummy. So even though it's like safety, they were having fun with it. Yeah, the producers are doing like really funny shit with this, and you're looking at that. And I remember the first time I saw that, I'm like, why did they blur that out? Like,
it's not an actual penis, but they've blurred it out like it is.
Not a real penis. Not real pee, but we're going to blur it out. Actually, I think the pee was real. It might have been.
It probably was real. They probably used that.
Simulated urine.
Simulated urine, yes. Which, of course, that came out of the trusty sidekick, and I think we call him the sixth host that never spoke a word, and his name was Buster, and he was the test dummy that endured many a thing. And I don't know how many Busters they actually went through, but like I think they kept the same Buster at least through the first like 2 or 3 seasons before he just couldn't come back. There wasn't enough left of him to do anything. So I'm sure they went through several Busters throughout 296 episodes. But yeah, it was just always fun. They gave a name to the crash test dummy and was in so many different experiments.
It was funny to watch Buster's progression because like they rebuilt him, they had the technology, but like every time they did something to him, whether it was catching on fire or explosions or bullets, like they would recreate him as best they could. But like he's clearly still been on fire at one point. And there's like part of his arm is like missing, and it's like like if you would watch it in syndication and like you're just checking it out randomly one day, like there would be an episode in the earlier time when you'd see like the full on Buster crash dummy body, and then the next episode, because it's in syndication, you'd see him and he's like completely screwed up and like parts of his head are missing. So yeah, Buster was the MVP for sure, man. I feel bad for him.
Like either he took like a champ, or secretly like they'd come into the shop one day and they'd turn the lights on and Buster'd be sitting in a chair at the sign that just said "kill me," like just let me die. Like I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, dude. There's something about dropping a crash test dummy from like a very high up place and just watching it lifelessly fall. You know, like, but they did that to him so many times. It was fantastic.
And I think I'm pretty sure on their last ever episode, they literally just strapped him to a rocket and sent him off into the sunset. Like it was like they were testing like, I don't know if it was an actual myth, but it was like a rocket chair, and they just put him on it and sent it, and he just gone. It's like, oh, not even. It's like there is some pomp and circumstance over like the fact that this was Buster's last myth, but not a whole lot. There's no sympathy for what they're putting him through.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely not. There is no remorse whatsoever. But it was the spirit of the show, though, wasn't so much to like laugh in the face of science. Like the format was to take like a largely held public belief or some kind of behind closed doors myth or something, and the application of trying to solve it, which didn't always necessarily mean that they found the most direct route, because sometimes you'd be trying to solve a myth and then you found out you can't replicate this in the ways that we were trying to do it.
Yeah.
So then they would basically bolt on to their engineering to try to get it to a point where they could get it to work.
Yes.
And that's where I think a lot of the fun was. I don't know if you think the same thing.
Oh, completely. And again, sometimes the myth itself is fun. Like the idea of actually trying it's really good. And I think not like I like how you point out a lot of them were just like actual like like not tall tales, but like urban legends or myths or things we had always heard of or stuff from the internet. But I think some of the best ones and where they really shined, because that was that's the biggest part of their professional experience, is when they would take things that happened in movies. Because, they're the people who are responsible for setting them up in the movie in the first place. And they would see like, okay, well, how plausible is this in real life? So even something as like, something that happens in lots of action movies, the hero jumps out of the window and falls all the way to the ground, but they land in a dumpster and then pop out of the dumpster and then they're back to running on their feet. It's, as close as we have to like, aim for the bushes that would actually work. And like, it was more like, it's plausible if the dumpster is completely filled with the softest material possible and it's outside of like a mattress factory. Because you have to imagine if there were like glass bottles or like, like things of like lumber or wood or metal and things are just sitting there. It's like, no, it's like, you're probably gonna die. Like it's not gonna really help jumping into a dumpster. And on top of that, like, actually hitting the dumpster, not like hitting the middle of the dumpster and not hitting your head against the side of it or something like that, or missing it. So it was when they tested like these movie myths that I felt like they were like especially excited, because like they were like, okay, how can we just make it look right on the screen? And now they're like, okay, now let's see if doing it the way we did in the screen would actually work in real life. And if it doesn't, what would we have to do to make it work in real life? That was fun to see.
Which got elaborate over time. Like in the beginning, I remember it was like they would insert sensors or something to kind of show like, okay, this is the amount of force that came out of Buster falling from this height, or Buster being in the car when it got hit by a snowplow or something. and then they even kind of upped the stakes over time too, to include like real blood or fake blood packets in Buster, so that if he got stabbed or if the concussive forces were big enough, it would trigger like real effects. And that really helped not just make it a cool visual thing to watch, but like really made you think about just what that crash dummy was going through. I mean, it was, and this is also a point in time, Joe, where the slow speed, the slow-mo camera, it wasn't really widely used quite yet. I mean, you saw it in plenty of action movies and stuff, but they would show it to the effect of like, we're seeing just how fast a bullet is moving and what happens to the surface that it hits when it does that kind of thing. And after this point in time, I really do feel like so many shows copied that. Like they ripped it off. But this was like, I feel like Mythbusters really made that sexy and fun to put into a TV show.
Oh, completely. I mean, for you to, it wasn't always, like, sometimes it was, like you said, like the really cool things to see of like you're seeing a bullet go through ballistic gel or go through water or go through something, or a weapon like slicing off like a ballistic gel body part, and you're watching it actually sear and cut through. And that stuff's all well and good. But other times it was just fun to actually sometimes watch a machine they built work in slow motion, so you can see all of the intricate moving parts that are doing their individual jobs. And that was really fun to watch. And, that was like, again, like taking something like how it's made and making it even more fun to watch, because you're doing it through the lens of an experiment.
Yeah. I think it was always fun to watch them attach a blade to something and then watch that blade hit something in high speed. that was always a treat, man, because there's stuff flying everywhere. There's vibrations. I mean, it was so cool to see what things do at high speed like that. And, it's like, and you'd also usually get Adam, who would be very enthusiastic about the myth and actually dress for the occasion and change what he was wearing so he would fit in for what they were doing. And every once in a while, Jamie would do it too. But very, very rarely would Jamie Hyneman actually change what he was wearing. And never would the beret be off unless he was going underwater. Yeah, I was going to say that was the only time he would change, is if they had to be in the water, Jamie was always in the water. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I think I can think of one time specifically where Jamie actually like changed his clothing, and that was when they were doing the Star Wars myths, and they were testing the myth of the high ground with a lightsaber, and would it actually give you an advantage? And both of them dressed like Jedis instead of just Adam.
Yeah. That's great. That had to have been later, because I don't think I was still watching when that one happened. That had to have been like the latter half. But
yes. I was going to say, and that is part of like the sad part of the show, is just like society and the fact that we get bored like eventually, and like we need to see something different. We either need to scale up what we're seeing, or it just tends to go away, because this is something, again, like when you get to almost 300 episodes of you testing myths, and like even though it had a working format, eventually that format will not capture the audience the way it used to. So you ended up seeing the show actually eventually revert back to just being with Jamie and Adam, and our other three hosts just were out of job, which was sad. But yeah, all good things have to come to an end, even though it didn't stay gone very long, because they just ended up moving the show to the Science Channel and putting two new hosts on there. And eventually, I think Adam got Mythbusters Jr., where he was on there doing stuff again, except he was doing it with kids. But Jamie had long left the equation in either scenario.
They did have this contest, I think, to figure out who was going to host the show next, and like whatever. That's really I had long been removed at that point. But the things that I fondly remember are some of these experiments that happened fairly early in the series. The one that I loved the most, because I debated this with people for many years, was the effects of rain and whether or not walking or running makes a difference. I mean, I would debate this with people all the time. And this is separate from the fact that there's probably more safety risks if you're running versus walking. Personally, I walk in the rain. I do not run in the rain. Okay. I just don't. I don't know where you fall on this side of the debate, Joe.
I mean, I run in the rain because I just want to get out of it faster. I'm not concerned over getting more wet. I just want to be done with it. So I run. I get out of there. Oh. So if the answer was and that's part of what they're testing is, do you actually get more wet if you walk in the rain or run in the rain? Which one will actually keep you drier? And I just don't want to be there. I'm apparently like a cat and just want to be out of it. So I run every time.
Yeah. And the thing is, they set up this simulated rain environment in the studio, and they had clothes that would capture the rain on the clothing, right? And then they would weigh the clothing and then say, okay, running versus walking, which clothes weighed more, right? They actually found out that walking in the rain, you actually don't get any more wet than you do if you ran. And so as soon as I watched that, I was like Leo DiCaprio pointing at the TV, like going, oh, validation. Like, it's real. Yep. It's real to me. God damn it. And it was real. So just take their advice on that. Like, walk in the rain. Don't run. You're not saving your clothes, man. It's not going to help you, Joe.
No, it's not. And in a less practical one that I personally enjoyed quite a bit, they actually did twice. They did a car snowplow flip myth, where if a car was driving and it clipped a snowplow, it would actually flip in the air. And the first time they did it, it had some pretty mixed results, and it was actually, it's one of those ones where it was kind of fun to see how frustrated they got over like trying to get it to work until they got something that kind of worked, and it didn't quite work the way they wanted to. But like, you know what? We tried here. Just damn it. This is the best we got with it. And then they came back to it and like, hold on. Some people say that you could straight up have a car get split in half by a snowplow. So let's see if we can test that. And that was fun to watch because, again, they took it to an extreme over. They got like, instead of having like how plows actually are, just like the one flat slab, and they angle it so it goes where you want to. This was, no. It's going to be two that meet in the middle, and it's going to plow it off in either way. And, you know, those plows just don't really, they're not there. because they're
not battering rams.
No, the inherent obvious safety issues of having a plow work like that. And on top of that, you're pushing it into another lane of traffic. You see, we wouldn't want the snow to do that. It doesn't work. It's unsafe. It's all bad. But to test the myth, obviously, with traditional plow, there's no way a car is getting cut in half. So they had to actually manufacture a plow to do that. And that was done here in Wisconsin. And it was done at a place where one of my friends, his name was Jake at UW Whitewater, he worked at the place that built the plow and where they tested it. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's actually really a point we didn't even bring up, was that while they did a ton of experiments based in the San Francisco Bay Area where M5 was based out of, they would travel the country and the world to try to get the right environments and do the right things to mimic this stuff, which is funny that a snowplow experiment would happen in Wisconsin, but that's fine. Yeah.
I mean, if all the things they could test with the state of Wisconsin, I'm happy I had to do with snow, and not something like, what if we built a cannon entirely comprised of cheese and we shot cheese out of it because Wisconsin loves cheese? It's like, well, true. That is entirely a waste of the said cheese, and we wish that you would not shoot it out of a cannon, because then we can't eat it anymore. But, you know, they stuck with something that was realistic and went with the snowplow, so we do appreciate that.
Speaking of realistic, one of my favorite myths was, can you build a ball of Legos big enough that you could roll down a hill and actually cause like property damage with?
Classic.
And they actually built a 3,000-pound ball of Legos that they meticulously constructed and just attached together. And by the time they got this ball, it's just this grotesque looking thing. It's like, I think it was like 7 or 8 feet tall.
Yeah, it was huge.
The best part was when they finally do push this thing down the hill, it just completely breaks apart.
Yep, it's like, well,
shatters.
Yep. Just like, all that work it's gone.
Yeah, it's like Geralt of Rivia. It's just like, fuck. And now we move on. But I can't imagine how much time it took to put that thing together and then just to watch it fall apart, like just old underwear down that hill. It just completely just shredded and fell apart. Part of me was like, man.
At the same time, though, like, even with that, like, you have to imagine, like, best job on the planet, though. So, like, you got paid, like, sure, like, it didn't work. It failed absolutely as miserably as it possibly could have, and that the ball didn't make it really anywhere, like, far enough to actually cause damage to the thing because it just broke itself apart. They got paid to put a giant ball of Legos together and push it down a hill. How fucking amazing is that? Like, that's like best job ever territory. So, which, I mean, just it goes with a bunch of other things because they would do practical things that were kind of fun. Where, like, one of my favorite ones was they would just test like a different amount of like fuel economy myths, and they would see like, hey, if you actually like follow close enough in a lane, basically like you're drafting, like you're racing, would that save gas? Does it make it easier to drive? The answer is yes. However, you are so close, it is not safe, so you shouldn't do it. We also, and then looking at like, okay, because they looked at how like UPS, the Postal Service, and like FedEx, how they're actually like plan their routes so the drivers only take right-hand turns. So even though they'd be driving a little bit further because they don't stop as frequently, they actually save on gas. So they would test that and see if that would work. Or they would see like, okay, so just stopping at more traffic lights frequently, does that cause you to lose more fuel economy? And in the process, we learned two things. One, yes, those things will affect fuel economy, and you should be mindful of them as you do it. And two, Carrie Byron does have some pretty solid road rage. So do not make her upset behind the wheel. She's not going to do anything about it. She's not going to like fly into you, but she may make the ride uncomfortable for everyone else in the car with her.
Dude, the amount of like car-based experiments they did were actually some things that we fought over amongst my friends group before we even watched the show, because they did prove that rolling the windows down instead of using the AC obviously improves fuel economy. And so that was a debate we used to have a lot because my friend refused to put the AC on. But then there was that idea of changing lanes, because every one of us knows someone who weaves through traffic and just want to murder them. And it turns out that weaving through traffic did generally get people to their destination about 3% faster than the folks that didn't. But it's like, is that really worth it to get there like a minute early?
No,
I mean,
it's not.
Yeah.
No.
It just pissed me off because every time I thought about that, I'm like, I'm that guy that will get into the middle lane and go a little bit slower and not care about that kind of stuff. Yeah. But they proved me wrong. That, I mean, I get there safer though. That's the point. I get there safer, less accidents.
One thing they never tested is that when you have someone who does fly past you much faster than they're supposed to be going, or is weaving through traffic, they've never actually tested what happens when you still pull up beside them when you exit, or you hit a stoplight, and it turns out you got to the same place at the same, not the same time, but you're now both stopped for the same amount of time. The satisfaction that goes through your veins, like, ha, you're a dumbass. You did all of that work, and we got to the same place. And here we are, both of us, waiting for the same period of time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it just...
Yeah, what's the level of satisfaction myth or something? Yeah. I guess to the point of what we've done with a lot of properties, Joe, this is a unique one in the fact that there is so much stuff out there. That they've done so much. And we always talk about lasting legacies of things because... for the most part, we're watching movies that have been out for sometimes 15, 20, 30 years. In the case of Mythbusters, this is a property that is, 19 years old already. And I still can't believe that. I almost want to refuse to believe it. But yeah, what do you think the lasting legacy of Mythbusters is?
One, from like a personal standpoint, it is what replaces Bill Nye the Science Guy. And this is, again, like probably not like a big time legacy, but how it works for me is that like I can't show students like Bill Nye the Science Guy stuff anymore because so much of like what's on there is like, we've actually found that this isn't accurate anymore. We found new things or new discoveries since it happened. Like even something as simple as like watching the space episode And like, okay, well, Pluto's not a planet anymore. All those theories over how the moon got there, we accept none of them anymore. We have new ideas over how it likely happened. And we have all of these things that have caught up where it's like, okay, a lot of this is inaccurate now. And a lot of it also, like the content, the look of it is so very much like you could tell this was made in 93. Everyone's trying to wrap. Every section of it of a different thing of your clothing is a different color. Some of it's on backwards, not just the hat, the shirt, the pants. We wore a lot of things backwards in the 90s. We just took that backwards hat thing to the next level. But this is something where the content doesn't necessarily date itself. Like, sure, like maybe like in the long run, we can see the clothes they're wearing. Like, okay, we wouldn't wear that anymore. But like none of it looks embarrassing. Like even thinking about like the really early stuff, like the format is like, nope, here's the format. Here's how it works. We're not trying to make it like appealing by doing something like I would say like catchy or trendy. It's a we're just doing the damn thing and seeing if it works. And because of that, I can show this content to my students and like we can like analyze and break down what they did well in terms of an experiment, and we can mimic that and try it ourselves. So it makes it so like the science part of what they do in each episode is accessible to the standpoint to anyone, even though they tell you not to try all the things that they do while you're at home. But in my defense, they're at school, not at home. So we can try it there as long as we follow certain safety procedures. And I think that accessibility is a big part of this show's legacy, in that like we can see two people who, I mean, even though they work in the Hollywood industry, you could kind of consider like they're basically blue collar people doing these big things that we wouldn't think would be accessible to, you know, the common viewer, the common person. And I think that has a lot to do, or not has a lot to do, but I think that's its biggest lasting legacy, is making these things and like the science behind them accessible to everyone.
Which I completely agree with. And I know I alluded to this point a few minutes ago, but I do credit Mythbusters for a very good part of this like continuing nerd tide that kind of came out of nowhere, because for many years, you know, guys like you and I were hiding this stuff from people. If we had interest in this kind of stuff, you know, if you want to start talking about space with people, they'd just be like, nerd. And nowadays they still do to an extent. But for me, when I look at the lasting legacy, it's the fact that you could have people like Jamie Hyneman and Adam Savage, who are completely different people, very strange in some regards, eccentric, of course, but it's the idea that these guys could come together and do really cool things that other people may not have ever given the time of day, because of like what you mentioned, the accessibility of what being nerdy and being a geek, whatever, kind of meant, and what that brought with it. And to see these guys be so successful in what they've done in their careers, they're having fun with what they're doing. Yes, it's challenging. It doesn't always end up the way they want, but they find a way through it. And for me, that's what I applied to myself. I went, wow, I can overcome anything so long as I have that right frame of mind. And I took that lesson from these guys. I really did. And I mean, I just kind of want to thank them for that.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of reality TV shows that can do that.
No.
And we just fortunately had this one for the better part of a decade and a half.
And one thing that is both sad, but also kind of not sad to mention, is that in one of the many things that did happen in the long run of this show is that epic rap battles of history did see what would happen if we took the Mythbusters and put them against the Ghostbusters and see who was in fact better at busting. And as big as a fan of the Ghostbusters as we are in the show, I think the Mythbusters did in fact win that epic rap battle. Their stuff was just better.
They did.
I think, trying to think of like lines that really, really stuck out was, you built a laser grid with no safety switch and Walter Peck was right. That's some shady shit. It just worked great. And when you think about it, it's like, yeah. How come when he put it, like when he turned the machine off, he had no failsafe to keep it from blowing up? That does seem like that was a slight oversight on Egon's part, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, ghosts aren't real, so it should be said. That was my takeaway from that. I don't personally believe in it, but yeah, I do actually agree with the result of that epic rap battle, and I don't always. But yeah, I mean, they were, to quote the Ninth Doctor, these guys were fantastic.
Yes,
they just were. They were fantastic, and any of the legal stuff that happened post show and all that kind of shit, I don't really care about. Like, none of it ever materialized. Like, as a show, these guys were fantastic, and it was just proof that you don't have to be like the mainstream to be successful. You can do your own stuff like this, so long as you've got the passion and the will behind it. And nostalgic, and, Joe.
Yes, absolutely. This was definitely a fun walk down memory lane, as this show often is, since we reviewed so many things in the past. And it is on that note that we would like to thank you for listening to Digital Dissection. And as always, we appreciate all that the Dissection crew does for us week after week. We know there are a lot of podcasts out there, so you choosing ours every week to listen to does mean a lot to us. And so does your support, because it does go a long way. And if you did happen upon this show by accident, you can always leave us a review or comment on the episodes so that we know that you're really enjoying the show, and that the people who distribute us also know you're enjoying the show quite a bit. Other things we like to enjoy as well is hearing from you. So feel free to leave us a message at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com, as we welcome your ideas for future shows, and any and all comments over, anything you just like to discuss, the things we've talked about, or shoot us a random thought. Who knows? Maybe we had it too. And until next time, keep on dissecting.